Welcome to the Black Sparrow Media Internet Broadcast Network.
You are listening to Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a podcast about Linux, open source, and amateur radio, for everyone. Now here are your hosts, Cheryl, W5MOO, Russ, K5TUX, and Bill, NE4RD.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome. You have tuned in to episode number 564 of Linux in the Ham Shack, the most terrific amateur radio podcast on the internet, now officially being listened to in Sweden. Probably already were, but now we know for sure. And we're going to go ahead and get into our deep dive topic here in a minute, but before we do that, we're going to introduce ourselves, and for the on assignment Cheryl, W5MOO, I'm Russ, K5TUX.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD.
All right, very good. Well, we'll talk about Sweden a little bit at the end of this, as soon as my dog gets uncaught from my headphones. It's going to be one of those. But anyway, yes, we are here. We are here. It's December. It's getting towards Christmas, and then it'll be New Year's, and then life will just suck more because we'll be in a new year.
But this also means that we're getting close to our break, too, which is really nice.
It does.
We can have an official break instead of all the unofficial breaks that we've had throughout the year because of other things going on in our lives.
Yes, I do. I mean, I honestly wish we could do things on a more regular schedule, but I mean, the three of us have many irons in the fire. So, but we do try and come out as close as weekly as humanly possible, and we thank you for sticking around with us as we try and navigate that and make our show as regular as humanly possible. But let's not dwell on that. Let's talk about Avalonia. And this one it's a great night for Bill to be having a topic of his own because I'm fighting a cold. So on the one hand, I don't really want to talk that much. And on the other hand, a cold generally, at least for people of the male persuasion, tends to make their voice a little lower. So at least in my headphones, I sound awesome. But we're going to let Bill talk a little bit about Avalonia. So have at it.
Yeah, so this is something we've been hinting at for a little while. We talked about some other tool sets that kind of use this in the background as well. But this is Avalonia UI. And what it actually is Avalonia is a powerful framework. That might be generous, but it's a powerful framework that enables developers to create a cross-platform application using .NET. It uses its own rendering engine to draw UI controls, ensuring consistent appearance and behavior across various platforms, including Windows, macOS, Linux, Android, iOS, and WebAssembly. This means that developers can share their UI code and maintain uniform look and feel regardless of the target platform. This is all obviously summary speech, so I'm just going to go through all of the summary stuff so you guys get the gist of exactly what this is. Applications built with Avalonia are written in either C# or F#, which makes it easy to rapidly prototype applications that can develop over time into complex systems. Unlike other toolkits that might be restricted by limited APIs or poor performance, again, might be a generous statement, Avalonia applications have the advantage of the full access to the platform's capabilities and deliver incredible performance thanks to compositional renderer. As Avalonia applications are cross-platform applications, they are architected similarly to other traditional cross-platform applications. Most common approach is to create a core project that houses the shared code, and then develop platform-specific projects that will consume this shared code. This does make it quite easy to build multiple endpoints for your application, deployment points for your application. Avalonia offers two techniques for creating user interfaces. The first one is to use code to build UI views, leveraging the extensive API provided by Avalonia. Alternatively, developers can utilize the extensible applications markup language, or XAML, or XAML, as most of us are probably familiar with. You might have heard of Xamarin over the years, or even WPF uses a sort of a XAML type thing. A declarative markup language that allows developers to define user interfaces. In this approach, the user interface structure is described in a XAML file, while the runtime behavior is defined in a separate code behind file. To learn more about XAML, refer to Avalonia XAML. So there you go. So essentially, I was looking at this specifically because I kind of wanted to play a little bit more in the space in .NET, because we all know that, even though .NET is Microsoft, it is open source, fully open source. And as more and more applications in the .NET space have become more aligned with running on multiple platforms. Yeah, Mono was just gifted to wine, as Mike says in the thing in the chat room here. There is a ton of nice, stable, and mature code out there that you can bring into your project and utilize to develop a full-fledged application and be able to have a consistent software inventory that in general is always nice to see. A little bit more about the packages, the NuGet packages. You can use a multitude of ways to control your application and package upgrades and behaviors. So it's definitely interesting. It's definitely zippy. It's pretty fast to compile. The applications do run natively. So it's not like you're running an Electron shell or something like that, or some kind of environment to run your environment, like Electron, which basically runs the either WebAssembly or some kind of HTML rendered web page inside of a windowed frame. So you notice right away that the application is generally more zippy. Along the lines of like a GTK app or a Qt app and stuff like that. So I don't want to take away from those frameworks or any of the other windowing frameworks or window forms development, similar frameworks like, FLTK or whatever that's used for all of the FL Rig and FL Digi and stuff like that. There are many platforms that you can use. This just happens to be one that's targeted against .NET. Which is familiar to my personal likings. I use .NET at work quite often. I also use a lot of Python. But I wanted to kind of play around with this because, I was always looking at the offerings from Microsoft, WPF and their universal apps and stuff like that. Although their universal apps really aren't universal to the fact that you can't run them as a GUI component or UI component inside of the desktop in Linux. So I was kind of interested when I found this project, which is very mature, has been around for quite a while. And I wanted to kind of just take a moment in one of our episodes to kind of talk about it. And I'm using the application environment to actually create my own connector for my rig control to talk to my Wavelog logging system. So I'm kind of using the Wavelog connector, which is written in Node and JavaScript, as a kind of like a template to build my own little app. And then I want to add additional features and stuff like that to that connector so I can build onto it and add more functionality later on, including little bit more rig control inside that interface. So I can use like hamlib or rig control D to do all that stuff, but I want to be able to control it within that particular application. Because right now in my workflow, I'm using FLRig and the Wavelog connector to do everything. So I'm using the FLRig connection application to, change, bands occasionally, power levels and everything else. And I kind of wanted to build that all into it's just like a super connector, so I can connect my rig control D in the background and have my log connected. So everything I do is all kind of done within this one application. Now it's not done, so I can't show you that. So this is really just an introduction into to the behavior of the UI and how you kind of get it set up. So we'll start off first just by talking about the license. Much like most of .NET, it's licensed under the MIT license. So in general, you can do pretty much whatever you want with this, especially as a hobbyist. I think once you get to the point of doing like a commercial application, then, obviously other questions and concerns need to be taken into account at that point. There's other rules and stuff like that you'll need to follow. And same thing goes with the Avalonia product. They do have a commercial offering as well. And that is more aligned with something that is a commercial product that is sold. But for your own purposes or an open source sharing product, it's definitely something that can be used, and you have something that you can deploy in full-blown UI applications out there to many platforms. So for installation, to get this kind of going, you need to have a .NET installation actually already on your system. They do recommend having .NET 8 or, of course, the latest greatest .NET 9, which was just released not too long ago. Both of those are supported. They do have an entire template library for starting up projects, and you would install that template library via using .NET new install avalonia.templates. Those of you that have been using .NET for a while are very familiar with installing templates and keeping them maintained. That's the easiest way to get the templates into the system. And there are IDE extensions for Rider, which we talked about a few shows ago, where they have a complete open source license version where you can use it for free if you're just doing an open source project or you're doing personal projects. Again, if you're using it for commercial reasons, you need to have a commercial version of that product. VS Code, there's an IDE extension for that, or whatever you call it. Can't remember. I think it's an extension too. I think Rider calls them plugins. VS Code calls them extensions. And in Visual Studio as well, there's an extension. These extensions allow you to easily create projects in Avalonia, as well as having preview windows for your XAML files and a bunch of other little tool sets that allow you to easily look at the code and have some code completion and everything else built into your project. Now, to create a project, if you were to do this from the command line, you would do a .NET new, and then you'd have the template name that you would include with an option of TAC O for the output of the project name. So that's very long, and I would say some people do this. I do this actually quite often at work for services because we have a template already built for our services at my job. So we use the command line a lot to do that. But if you're using Rider, which this is what I've been using a lot, because why not? It's cool and it's free. There is, let me switch over to it because all of a sudden my UI is acting up. There it is. You can just load up Rider and click the New Solution button. And then over on the left, you have the option to pick some custom templates. And the templates that are generally used for Avalonia, you have a few that they give you here as the ones you want to use. There's the .NET app, which would be your kind of like the basic UI application, standard, just the view and the view model. The other would be the MVVM application. And then the other one that they have is what they call a cross-platform application, which basically just has all the other deployment options built in. I believe the MVVM has basically the desktop on there, which is kind of like the important one, as well as I believe there's a web in there as well for a default deployment option. And I'm going to create one here just to make sure I'm right on that. But you can always refer to the documentation, which we have linked in the show notes to give you that further. But I do like using Rider to do it because it gives you all of the options when you're starting. So you get an option to choose a solution name, you get an option to choose a project name, where you want it to be, if you wanted to create a Git repository for it, if you want to put the solution and the project in the same file, which generally most people don't do anymore. And then you also get to pick the target framework, whether you want .NET 8, .NET 9, whether you want to use C# or F#. And so I'm just going to hit create on this real quick so I can just see what it does just to make sure. So the MVVM is just basically the desktop application. So it doesn't have all of the other files or deployment options on there. So I'm going to close this, and I just want to look at the other solution real quick here. So if I also do a cross-platform one, let's just hit create, and let's see what that puts up. So yeah, the cross-platform one on my system gives me the application deployments for Android, the browser, the desktop, and iOS. So it gives me all three of those plus a base project where my core project exists. So I would recommend, if you're just doing a desktop application and you don't know how complicated it's going to be, I would suggest, and they actually suggest this too, is to use the MVVM for it, and that stands for Model View Model, and it's an architecture pattern that'll split the code base into three different pieces. So the model will be used to store and handle your data. This is a very common pattern. You see this used a lot. I use it every day for services, and then we also have UIs that consume the services and stuff like that. So ours are a little bit broken up a bit more. But basically, the model will store your data and handle your data. This would include ways that you define if you're making requests and responses to like external services. And in my case, hamrig or hamlib, rig control D is an external service. I would build my models that I'm asking for information and getting returned information back in those models, so I can have it already pre-scrubbed so I know what I'm getting back. The view is kind of the user interface part of it. That's the XAML side of things. That's what you can actually see in the application. And then the view model is the thing that sits between the view and the model. It handles all of the interactions with the view. So it's kind of like the mediator between the view and the model. It knows about the model and what the model is supposed to give back to it. And the view knows the view model, but it doesn't know anything about the view. So it doesn't handle anything with relationship to the actual UI itself. And that's kind of the important part of it. That it's sort of the trans, in essence, it's sort of a translation layer that's going to sit between your business logic or your service logic and the actual UI front end. So if there's any other things that need to be done in order to get the data back to the view, it's done in the view model, and that's where it handles all that stuff. Deployments are all binaries. When you go and you build a project, you end up with a binary. If you've ever built a .NET app, .NET build, .NET run, whatever, it's going to create a whole directory with all your dependencies compiled and your executable compiled. Those you can double click, just like any other compiled application on your Linux box. You can / it from the command line, or they provide some documentation, which I found quite interesting because, we always want to learn about deployment inside of Linux boxes and in some cases Apple on Mac OS. They have full documentation that shows you how to build an app bundle deployment for Mac OS and create a Debian package, which I think is pretty slick. And that's basically it from like the 10,000 foot view of getting started. Obviously using Rider or let's say even Visual Studio. They have the Visual Studio version that's for open source as well, or even VS Code. I haven't used VS Code on this. I don't know exactly the whole process with that. I use VS Code on other projects. But Rider makes it quite easy to run everything, and I'm kind of getting used to using it with all of its fancy features and options and plugins and themes and everything else that I can possibly use. But over on the Avalonia site, they have a plethora of samples, which we have also linked in the show notes that show you kind of just some basic understanding of how to like build an MVVM app, doing drawing, dealing with data templates, routing, navigation, custom controls, view interactions, automated UI testing, which is always important if you're doing a really big app and you want to test things as you're building your app. And so you make a change and you'd run your test to ensure that your change didn't break an existing functionality. And they have complete apps on there that you can run and test and kind of see how things are built. I think coding by example is always very beneficial. They're also just a great documentation website that you can go from a simple tutorial. They have like the traditional to-do list application, and they'll walk you through building that application using the MVVM architecture. And testing. Mike says testing. That's what users are for. That's so true. So true. And another interesting link I found was a GitHub project for Awesome Avalonia, and we've mentioned many of the other awesome something projects repos that basically give you links to a bunch of other things related to that. But there's an Awesome Avalonia, which has a bunch of sample projects, including stuff that's in audio, music, data transfer, finance, gaming, graphics, productivity, software development. You'll find libraries and extensions in there for generic libraries, localization, doing internationalization and stuff like that, doing theming and icons, all kinds of project setups for various architectures, doing MVVM, MVP, MVU, doing charts, plots, diagrams, controls, game engines and games and web browsers, tons of videos and podcasts, ebooks and courses that you can find out there using Avalonia. And I believe it was actually, I think there was even a segment in the most recent .NET Conf, which was last month, where they did talk about Avalonia. And I was watching some of the .NET 9 announcement stuff, and I saw many questions of people say, "Well, how's this? What do you think about Avalonia?" Which I thought was kind of humorous in the YouTube chat stuff, because they generally didn't answer that, but then there was an entire segment on Avalonia. So I've kind of found that this whole process of kind of going through and looking at it quite interesting. I've been able to I've been playing with the Mac for a little bit too. I was kind of using Warp, a Warpinator, which is basically a shell replacement with AI stuff in it to kind of write code for me, simplify some stuff. I actually made my first connector to Hamrig or Hamlib. I keep saying it, Hamlib with Warp. Excuse me. And it actually worked the first time. So that was kind of cool. And I have plugged in Codium to my Rider IDE here on the Linux box, which is another AI product to do that. But I really haven't actually used Codium for anything. I've installed it a couple times on some various IDEs, I think in VS Code and Rider. And I really haven't played with it, so I can't really say much about it, except for it does give you some prompts to have it refactor your code and everything else directly in the application code base, which is kind of neat. Like when I have I'm just opening one of the demo apps here, and it gives me the option to refactor, explain, or docstring the particular class and function and stuff like that, method, I guess, whatever you want to call it, depending upon your familiarity with various languages. I always mess those up, but I think it's an interesting toolkit, and the performance is pretty good. And we talked about what was that thing we talked about before that was IoT driven website or something or application. I'm gonna get all messed up here now.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to remember what you're talking about. What was it in reference to?
No, we mentioned it. It was on the Short Topics show last time. Avalonia. I'm going to Google it real quick here. Sorry. Oh yeah, develop for embedded. And what was that? The weather, not the weather thing.
Are you talking about ham clock?
No, no, that was a deep dive.
Right.
Now I'm gonna just go back to the episode. Sorry, I feel like an
Hammond
idiot
and
now.
Han. Hammond and Han. Oh,
Yeah. 562. It
automotive
was
limit, WebVM.
oh no, it must have been the one before that. So it was
Yeah.
559. 559. Oh yeah, Meadow. Meadow, cross-platform solution for building IoT applications, enabling the same application code to run across a variety of computing contexts. Hey, does that make sense? Does that sound something familiar to what we're talking about? That's where that relationship came. So Wilderness Labs. So if you go back to that our episode 559, we kind of mentioned that in passing, and that was sort of the one of the things I kind of ran across that was directly linked from Avalonia UI. So it's I think it looks pretty slick and it appears pretty powerful. And if you're familiar with C# or even F#, I've really never done anything in F#. I think I've played around with it once or twice. But it definitely looks like something that would be of interest to people that want to take like a console application, which I know I've done a million console applications in .NET for giggles, and definitely some web services, web AI APIs. But I've never done a full UI using .NET Core, what we call it these days, or probably they just call it .NET. But .NET Core never really had that front end, that UI thing. You're always using for like in Windows development, you do web forms and stuff like that. And I never got into the universal app stuff because it's just such a pain in the butt. But this is pretty neat. I'm gonna definitely be spending some time over probably the next few months just kind of playing around with it for my own project. And if it ever gets to a point where it's worthwhile to share and put out there, I'll just put it out so people can look at it and criticize how bad my .NET code is, and definitely do that. But yeah, with the library and of all the NuGet packages out there, and your ability to connect to a variety of services and platforms and everything else to get your data, I think it's a pretty powerful toolkit to strap onto to an application that you want to be more than just a console app, or maybe something running in the background where you want like I want to see the frequency of my radio when I'm running my little log linking application and stuff like that. So that's sort of the introduction to Avalonia UI. I don't really have much more to add to it, but I'd be willing to take some questions if you have any. I know it's probably a bit much.
Well, unfortunately, Avalonia UI and C# and F# and .NET and all of that are kind of outside my sphere of expertise. Not to say that I wouldn't be interested in learning some of this stuff, and it does seem like this gives you a nice, quick, sort of like a quick start introduction, especially using some of the templating and available applications and stuff like that might get me into taking a look at using C# or for application building. And of course the AIs are great, because I saw, looking at the news feed in the Discord earlier today, that there was an article posted somewhere, I think it was on Slashdot, that said the new, like, everyone's new favorite programming language is English. apparently everyone's using it with AI bots to write code. So
Yeah,
might entirely be true. So
yeah, I mean, the AI bots do a pretty decent job of giving you some boilerplate code and can help you along the way, especially with like auto completing stuff based upon context of what you're actually coding. So I do have to say, like, they do help quite a bit with that thing, but I don't think they're capable of writing a full application without the aid of a developer for sure. I'm not sure we're quite there yet. But it definitely can definitely kickstart your project to get you a lot of the componentry and stuff like that you want to include in your application. Like, I don't want to sit there and read the entire spec for Rig Control D. so, that's why I just used it to boilerplate that out for me. So I could just I just want to have a get frequency and that's it. And I'll figure the rest out here as I go. I just wanted it for testing. And it did that right away, and including giving me a version that had the ability to run a thread and just do polling on it, so it can just poll the frequency as it changes and stuff like that. So like that kind of stuff, I appreciate that, because I'm not going to go into learning the full full code base and everything else on how to use something that I was like, I only need these 2 bits of information on for my initial startup. But I'll probably go through and just and add all the other features that I want to add to my particular application. But I think a lot of the boilerplate stuff is nice to kind of jumpstart your project, so you're not sitting there staring at an empty tab with your brand new shiny connector service to your external product, or an API somewhere out there on the web and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I've used it a couple of times, the AI bots, to create, like you say, a piece of boilerplate code that you can riff on and actually customize to your actual needs, just so you don't have to go, what was the object that I need to reference to call an LDAP query or something like that, because then you can reference it and make whatever changes you need and make your code actually do what you want it to do, as opposed to just a chunk of thing that a bot might suggest. But this definitely sounds like an interesting project. Hopefully, as you get more into it, we can have a sort of rerun deep dive on this later on, where you talk more specifically about what the code can do, what you've done with it, so on and so forth. But as an overview, I think this is great, and I actually want to look at this more myself, because I want to learn more about C, the original C, before the object-oriented C, and also C++ and C#. So I know they're all very different, but they have some basis in a central core of programming, and it's one of the ones that I sort of managed to skirt aside when going through my CS curriculum. So I need to get back to it, like Morse code.
For sure. Well, there it is. That's Avalonia UI in the introductory sense. If you use this or have some comments on it, please send us a note and give us some feedback. And we'd like to hear from you. And what are you working on, if you're actually using Avalonia for anything?
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and pretty much wrap this one up. We do have a couple of announcements. We would appreciate if anybody has a couple of dollars to throw our way every month, if you would support the show on Patreon or PayPal. That would be great. It helps keep the lights on. And the more people who help out in that way, the more likely we won't have to do like fundraisers for, community events like Hambench and stuff like that. We'll just be sort of self-supporting, and that would be great. If not, please continue to listen, distribute the program as widely as you can, through your social media networks, your clubs, whatever it is you do that distributes information. That would be great too. And just a reminder that we have our contest running, sort of informal contest. If you suggest a random topic for our future show, we will enter you in a drawing for some show swag and potentially something more interesting. We'll see. We haven't fleshed out the details on all of this yet. And then, of course, we'll be giving out bits of swag when your suggested topics actually come up on the random picker wheel and we do your topic. We'll give you some swag as well. So hopefully we'll get some more suggestions. Suggestions have been coming in. I don't want to forget to mention that. But we can always use more. The more, the merrier. And we would love to talk about whatever topic it is you're interested in. So please send those in to us at info@lhspodcast.info, or send them via direct message on Discord. So because we're having to squash 2 episodes together in recording land, we will not have a social media roundup tonight, with the exception of the live chat where we had Steve KJ5T and Mike K6GTE. We will gather up all the information for all the social media networks and new subscribers and all that for the next show. So I think we're done, unless you have anything else to contribute before I sign off.
No, let's do it.
All right, so with that, we are down to the end of the program. Thanks for listening. Hope you have a great week, and tune in next time for our Short Topics episode. We hope you join us then. In the meantime, we'll talk to you all very, very soon. This has been episode number 564 of Linux in the Ham Shack. And for the On Assignment Cheryl, W5MOO, I'm Russ, K5TUX.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD73.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a community-sponsored podcast. Live recordings are Sunday nights at 8 o'clock Central Time. Our homepage can be found at lhspodcast.info. You can support the podcast via Patreon at patreon.com/LHS podcast. We're also on Discord, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and Mastodon. Contact us via email at info@lhspodcast.info or via voicemail at 190954777469. That's 1909 LHS show. We also have merch. So until next we meet, remember to always heed your hedonism.